Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Wednesday, June 11th, 2025, and on Wednesdays we talk about emotional well-being and relationships. And so let's start here today. Human health and well-being both depend upon the health of the oceans, even for people who live far from the sea. As you know, and I've mentioned already earlier this week, the ocean holds about almost 97% of the world's surface water and generates more than half of the atmospheric oxygen. It absorbs more than 90% of the excess heat, okay, and about a third of the carbon dioxide as well. So that combines then to help slow climate change. And then the oceans are the principal source of food for and nutrition for about 40% of the world's population. And it's also the origin of multiple essential medicines and even has contributed to various types of technological innovations. So, most important of all, then, for today's vlog, it's well known that the natural environment in general has a clear positive impact on human health and well-being, and it's long been considered a key determinant of health. And so there are two broad categories of the natural environment that we talk about. We talk about green spaces. I'm sure you know the term. So green space refers to natural or urban land areas that are covered either completely or partially in grass and trees and vegetation. For example, wilderness, parks, gardens, forests, these sorts of things. And then blue space refers to the natural or constructed environments that include visible water, such as oceans and lakes, rivers and streams. Research shows that access to green and blue spaces has direct benefits to both general physical health and mental health. Even more specifically, the evidence has consistently shown that interactions with the oceans and the coastal regions and salt marshes, any types of blue spaces, benefit our physical and mental health, as well as our social development and even our spiritual well-being. So I'm going to dive a little bit more, do a little bit of a deeper dive into these issues today. But if I could change one specific thing about our curriculum, our educational curriculum for children, I'd figure out some way of trying to connect children more often and more directly with both green and blue spaces. But on the ocean side of things, a healthy ocean obviously promotes children's health and development in a variety of different ways, providing the nutritious seafoods that are rich in proteins and essential minerals and the key micronutrients, right, like the famed omega-3 fatty acids, the latter of which, of course, promote brain development and enhance cognitive functioning and improve memory retention, concentration, and our learning abilities. Clean and unpolluted coastal environments also encourage physical activity, swimming, surfing, beach sports, you name it. And all of these activities, of course, benefit our fitness, motor skill development, balance and coordination, while also supporting mental health and building resilience. And guess what researchers are currently studying? I don't think it'll surprise you. Surf therapy. That's right, it's a real thing. It's an innovative approach in the field of physical activity that also uses the therapeutic effects of the ocean. Combines surfing then with structured exercises to promote mental and physical well-being. And internationally, so far, surf therapy has been applied to children and adolescents, for example, dealing with mental health problems, as well as adults who've been diagnosed with things such as depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. And the initial studies are finding positive effects of surf therapy in terms of reducing symptoms and improved general well-being, even spiritual well-being. A lot more research to be done. But in addition, participation just in health-related activities, not just in surfing, but anything in terms of physical activities, in terms of rehabilitative activities within a more natural environment, a green space and blue space environment, actually affords additional benefits to health and well-being beyond that which we get in our standard urban or indoor environments. Okay, so then the single largest study that I've looked at looks at the general impact of environmental quality on mental health. And the study uses data from 167 different countries collected between 2007 and 2023. I'll try and leave a link below, so if you want to look at it in greater depth and detail. But the authors then use this panel data to formally investigate the impact of environmental quality on mental health outcomes. And the results suggest that overall environmental quality is positively associated to mental well-being. And more specifically, the authors found that the air quality and the quality of blue spaces were both positively associated with emotional well-being. So again, that applies directly to our ocean theme today. But also, in addition, death by suicide is negatively correlated with air quality and quality of a country's green spaces. So in other words, they found that over these 167 different countries, the improvements in air quality and the access to high quality green spaces were both contributing to lower suicide rates. So again, this is a no-lose proposition in my view. And then finally, the evidence has also shown that exercise, spending time in green or blue spaces, and feeling part of a supportive community all contribute to better physical and mental health, but especially in terms of healthier aging. I was fascinated by one study in particular that looked how participation in self-organized ocean swimming groups contributed to healthy aging amongst older men and women in Perth, Australia. That's right. So the researchers found that access to marine life on a regular basis, each individual's personal growth experiences, and their level of their social connectedness within these groups then affected both their regular use and access of the blue spaces, and ultimately enhanced their overall health and well-being, including their sense of self-efficacy and resilience. This is quite important. It's important throughout our lives, but especially as we get older. This notion of being more resilient, being able to bounce back, being able to recover, especially from the little, the falls and our little foibles and whatever we do to ourselves along the way. So yeah, it's important, and not as well as our mental and intellectual resilience too. Finally, there's an international study that looked at 18 countries and their general populations, investigating the complex relationships between environmental characteristics of blue spaces and visits, the people's capacity and regularity of visiting these spaces, and then how this affected different aspects of their subjective well-being. And overall, they found that the blue space visits were associated with better subjective mental well-being in a couple of ways in particular. So, for example, if the visits took place in nearby coastal areas or rural rivers, and that these were perceived as being safe and of having good, decent water quality, and if they spent more time there, like at least 3 hours, all of these factors then directly contributed to subjective or mental well-being. And then the nature of the activities was not even quite as important. But can involve everything from swimming, a little bit more rigorous, to just socializing or playing with children or just walking along the river or along the beach. As long as you were having access to, again, a relatively healthy, safe, and clean environment, then this consistently produced positive effects, or it positively affected our mental well-being. Now, to be clear, it's difficult to disentangle the independent effects of access to blue spaces upon our emotional well-being and our mental health, because there are so many different confounding factors at play. What do I mean? Well, for example, all else equal, imagine yourselves suffering from some high level of mental or emotional distress or discomfort in general. Okay? Just having the opportunity then to take a break from the daily routine or the key sources of distress would almost certainly have a positive effect, make a difference, regardless of whether or not people were visiting blue or green spaces. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so in fact, we even have this concept. We talk about taking a mental health day off from work. So yes, relief can, from stress can assume many different forms. But that said, let me conclude with the following. That is, what are the mechanisms that researchers think may be affecting our mental health and well-being just through access to the oceans and blue spaces in general? And how do these visits then have beneficial effects upon our mental health and emotional well-being? Well, there are a few key mechanisms that seem to be at play here. At the very least, access to the oceans and blue spaces provide opportunities for physical activity, from swimming to surfing, from walking to building sandcastles. Movement matters. I don't care who you are, where you're from. Movement matters to our mental health and well-being. And so that also, by the way, includes coming up with ways to grant people with certain physical limitations or disabilities access to these spaces as well, because they too will benefit even from limited movement, but more importantly, from the fact that they're going to be in these environments that have so many other possible benefits. And so then, while some folks travel to the beaches and blue spaces alone, that's fine. Usually, most people will go in some kind of a group, and there seems to be clear benefits to the group element of visiting the blue spaces, unless, of course, you end up arguing with one another. But here's the thing. We actually tend to argue less when we're in blue spaces. We're already in better head spaces and emotional spaces just by having some general access. So it tends to be positive across the board. And then our access to blue spaces in general, net of other factors, again, seems to have both direct positive effects in terms of our cognitive restoration and I'm sure you know, our overall stress reduction and regaining some degree of emotional balance. So again, the research is quite consistent across all of these different dimensions. And then relatedly, access to oceans and blue spaces appears to be directly related to our emotional regulation through our connections with nature. Again, net of other factors. So, and then consistent with these mechanisms, the best results seem to be found amongst those people who are able to use these blue spaces and engage in physical activities and or some types of regular or healthy social interactions, or both. And then also, if you happen to have children, just playing with children. But again, just kind of general socialization are both associated with particularly high levels of well-being. So again, if you're able to access the blue spaces, if you're able to connect with others and or with children, this has a multiplying effect on our emotional health and well-being. And then in addition, the access to oceans and blue spaces are especially beneficial if they have the presence of wildlife. So think of their reactions whenever we see a dolphin in the ocean or a whale or these sorts of things, or just fish in general, right? So you've got that's in the oceans, but you could in any type of a lake or river or what have you. So if there's the presence of wildlife, this enhances our well-being further. It seems to be the access to the quality or high quality water that makes a difference. Obviously, if you're by a polluted stream, it may have a depressing effect on you, right? And then even in terms of accessing these blue spaces and green spaces, in terms of air pollution mitigation. So all of these things combine to produce healthier physical and mental effects, okay? All right, even just the provision of a different environment, a space, a cooling element to being by the ocean, that can have an independent effect as well. And then finally, I guess it's difficult to evaluate ultimately the possible effects on our spiritual well-being or just the exposure, to the awesomeness of the oceans. Even if you're not a swimmer, almost everyone generally tends to be healthier, at least emotionally, after a day spent on an ocean or by the lake or by a river. Just like the other day, even though I'm 63, I had to stop in the middle of a run when I happened upon this delightful little stream that I hadn't noticed before. I'd run on the same path a few times previously, but then my ear, something caught my eye, and I noticed there was this little stream hidden, meandering along just a few meters off of the little trail. So, and I was transported. I immediately felt like a child again, just watching with amazement as this clear water navigated over and among the rocks. And I spent a couple of minutes just looking at the stream and then looking at the little, plants and the animals competing for access to this little, fountain of life. I didn't see any marine life, but that's okay. But it was just this lovely little ecosystem teeming with life. And I just kind of stood there in amazement, imagining the endless possibilities. Again, like a child. And then I realized that if that little stream can keep running endlessly, ceaselessly, seemingly, right? Or at least as a metaphor, then so can I, right? And I know that the stream eventually is going to end somewhere. It's going to connect to something else, just like you and I are eventually going to end somewhere and connect to something else. But we're connected now, too. And that was the point. And for that, I guess we can all be truly grateful. All right, so that's my little anecdote, and that's my little story for the day. But yeah, get access to blue space. If not the ocean, just get down to the lake, to the pond, to the river, to the stream, whatever. It makes such a difference. All right, until next time, as ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance, and splash a little water on your face when you get a chance. We'll see you soon.